Last speaker of the day, we're about to hear from John Knox, who is the Consulting Solutions Engineer for Calix. John's here to talk to us about how embracing automation can boost productivity, lower costs and transform your operations. Quick bio. As a consulting sales engineer for Calix, John provides guidance to operators and broadband network evolutions encompassing the whole Calix portfolio, from intelligent access edge FTTX networks to the in-home managed Wi-Fi portfolio, revenue edge and associated cloud portfolios. John has over 25 years experience in the service provider, broadcast and cable industries, enabling customer architectures for all aspects of access network deployments, including FTTX, DOCSIS and IP-based services, driving the deployment of these solutions to meet the changing demands of the service providers in a highly competitive environment. The floor is yours. We found it online, it's fine. Right, click us there if you need it.
Hi everyone. So I'll have a bit of a time constraint, obviously, because we have to get ready for lunch. So I'll be trying to keep on track, keep everybody on track, and so we can get to lunch in time and then go play with some guns. So if you're not familiar, I know some of you already. I've been around in the cable industry for many years. I then defected about 3 years ago. I moved, 2 years ago now, actually, and moved to Calix. Calix, if you're not familiar, are the working fibre to the home. There's two areas of the portfolio. One is your fibre access side of the house, and the other one is the in-home managed Wi-Fi. So the idea is we can kind of do both sides of the portfolio. So I'm not here today to talk about the portfolio or Calix. If you have any questions about Calix or what we do, I mean, obviously I'll be around with the guns later on today. So the idea today is basically just to give you a view of where we think things are moving. We talk about automation. Automation is going to be primary. We have to try and keep things as simple as possible and try and look at how we can automate your network deployments. Now, coming from the cable industry, I know that that's been a topic that's been on everybody's mind for many years, been discussed for many years, and nothing really has moved along. But I think looking at the fibre industry, they're in the same boat. If you look at the fibre industry in the UK, the fibre to the home, all the altnets and your providers that you have in the UK, it's very much like the cable industry was way back when I started in the mid-90s, where you had a lot of cable companies, and then all of a sudden you start to get this consolidation. And things will start to consolidate, and you'll get the bigger cable companies. I don't know if it'll collapse all the way to one, as we had with the cable industry, but it will start to collapse. And I think this year we'll start to see this consolidation on the fibre side of the house start to happen. You'll start to see some of the altnets start to be swallowed up by some of the bigger players. So I think that'll start to come on that front. So what we're seeing as far as the trends, if you look on the blue box on the left-hand side, you have all the usual stuff you talk about, where we talk about the bigger bandwidths, lower latencies. All of that is the same. But one of the things we're actually seeing nowadays is the subscriber requirements they're really looking at things like the in-home experience, your antennas in the home. They don't care too much about speeds and feeds anymore. Yeah, you have to admit, if you get a gigabit per second to the home, how are you going to use a gigabit per second unless you're going to pirate a lot of videos, as Guy was talking about. But there's not a huge amount of bandwidth. There's a huge amount of bandwidth. So people now talking about service is, what can I do with that? What's the quality of that service? Is the in-home experience good? Is your in-home Wi-Fi network good? My kids constantly come to me and say, Dad, the internet's broken. The internet, I'm sure, is perfectly fine. It's working not perfectly fine, but the in-home Wi-Fi isn't working as it should do. So there is that experience that we're seeing now. And customers are being more self-aware. They want to do this themselves. They're getting to the point where it's like, I want to basically plug this in, for it to be provisioned and for it to work. And if I want to change it, I can change it myself. And that one needs automation behind there to actually do that. Now, as a service provider, you have to be able to provide that. And that is where some of the complexities come in, because the architectures that we see today are really not designed really too much for that. So we're really looking at, as we start to bring in all of this managed portfolio, as you would say, that you have to think about all of the quality of service, and it's things that everybody's done, whether it's been the cable industry and the DSL networks or in the fibre industries. And customers nowadays, we're seeing, well, our customers nowadays, we're seeing the service providers, they're being driven by revenue. The battle to build is near enough coming to an end, especially with the industry, the markets we have today. Now people are being driven by, we want to see your subscribers, we want to see revenue. Now in the cable industry, yeah, you have Virgin have millions of subscribers, but in the fibre industry, there's a lot of small altnets who are struggling. They've built these fibre networks, but there's nobody on them. So they have to bring in revenue. So as customers are moving away from speeds and feeds and more to what do you offer, they have to try and be clever about that side of the house. And what we're seeing is that even though we all know data rates are going up are growing year on year, we're seeing that going on, and it has been going on for many, many years. We have seen a lot of switch for the people in the home as well to say, right, get high-speed data, that's great, but what are you doing with my data? And so there's a lot of thought nowadays, and we've seen a lot of customers coming to us saying, what are you doing with my data? Because consumers aren't, you see there's 62% of the people don't believe that people will keep your data private. They think that they will sell it on. And actually some companies have come out and publicly said they will sell your data. So if you look at some of the vendors, you shouldn't name them, but they will basically say, yep, you sign with us and we will actually, one of the monetize things is we actually sell your data on. And a lot of customers, myself included, don't feel overly comfortable with that. We now have cookie hell as well, where you're constantly asked every single website to basically say, do you accept these cookies? And one of those is always, are you willing to let your data be marketed on? And so that's a constant thing that people are worried about nowadays. So that's another thing that we have to keep in mind when we look at how we build these networks and keep things secure for people at home. On the ISPs or BSPs, BSP is a broadband service provider. I don't know if it's an industry thing they use in the fibre industry. In cable industry, it's ISP, to be honest. But you have BSPs. And what we've seen with the BSPs is what they're looking at is they want automation. The last, one of the recent light reading surveys is automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, are all things that these people they want. Now, what we have to keep in mind is a lot of these people they're asking, the broadband service providers, are relatively small. So you're not asking British Telecom for automation. You're not asking for some of the big service providers for automation. You're asking for a little guy in the street who wants to basically launch a service provider as a service provider in, I don't know, pick a town. Taunton, that's where I live there. So they want to say, in Taunton, we want to launch a service. There's me and my 3 mates. We want to deploy a service. It has to be fully automated. So they look at automation as one of the major things, because if they can automate things, they can drive down their costs, they can make it simple, they can run the network with as few people as physically possible. And that's what they're looking at, because with that, they have lower running costs, lower OPEX, and that means that they can actually provide service and make some money on their side. So there's a lot of thought around that side. And that's slightly different to what you may see with some of the bigger companies. So Virgin Media, British Telecom, those kind of guys, Vodafone, who have a lot of legacy stuff that they have to migrate through as well. And one of those things, of course, is that when you look at networks today, it says fibre to the home networks, but in reality that could be any network. You basically have a different segregation or silos, effectively, where your mobile network, your enterprise network, and your residential or small business type networks, all still siloed. As much as we've talked, and I've been in this for a long, long time now, we've talked for years and years and years about consolidation. How do we consolidate everything together? One of the issues we've had is can you get, for instance, a 5G network? Can you get a mobile network? How do you consolidate a mobile network onto an access network? And you've got problems with timing, you've got problems with the latencies, you've got problems with upstream and downstream, request grant cycles and cable, and fibre is the same. There's lots and lots of different things that come into play. And these are things that we're now slowly starting to see will actually be worked through. So we're actually starting to see that there is the capabilities now to start to bring these networks together. But when we look at the networks today are siloed. I mean, we have to admit, they have different networks, and this siloed approach that we've had from the legacy side of the house makes it difficult. So this bringing automation, bringing consolidation, and it makes it difficult. So you have different access networks. You have potentially a different core back-end network that has, if you're using BNGs, for instance, for data provisioning and for traffic management, it's a customer says, I want to move, I'm with Vodafone, I've got Vodafone at home, that's myself, I've got Vodafone on mobile, I've got Vodafone at home, I want to switch seamlessly from one to the other. I'm sure that isn't a seamless switch over. They'll have different infrastructures completely, different provisioning systems, different BNGs, and that transition from one to the other, I'm sure for Vodafone is extremely complex. So we need to try and make that as simple as possible. And actually bring consolidation is this first step of actually moving towards full automation. Now, for some of the small guys, some of these small providers we have in the UK now, in the fibre side of the house, they don't have this legacy. So they can actually start from day one. And all the tools are there today. Automation can be done today. And zero-touch provisioning, seamless provisioning of services, all of that is available. It's just that when you have these legacy networks, it just takes time to bring those together. So when we look at traditional networks, you can see we have the different component parts. So you may have an access network, whether that be cable, whether that be fibre. You've got your aggregation network. You have your BNGs if you're doing something like DSL, for instance, or PPP. You've got lawful intercept, and you've got your edge routers back to your cores. So there's lots of component parts. They all have to be looked at to basically how do we migrate from one to the other. And one of our customers in the US, Verizon, who are, as you're probably aware, are big. They have both sides of the house. They have the access, and wireless and wireline, as you would call it, sides of the house. They basically came out and actually publicly said that, yes, these networks are not made for the dynamic applications we have today. They're just not ready for it. And they are actually spending a lot of money right now to basically re-architect their entire network. So they're actually spending a fortune in the US to do that side of the house. And there's lots of different ways, and we'll go in the next few slides, we'll mention some of the different ways that we've seen the industry moving is how do they do this move from A to B, basically. But for them, the big things were obviously cutting the operational expenditure. For them, obviously keeping revenue, increasing their revenue, keeping it simple as possible. Simplicity is something that we keep on going on about, but keeping things simple. If you keep things simple, then it will excite your customers that you have, because they'll get these services that they want, and it will grow your business. Now, that's an actual tagline from our company, so this simple, excite, grow, if you look at the website, but that's all you're going to get from me pushing Calix on that side of the house. But the idea is that you really do need to keep things simple. You have to think about, if I'm going to bring everything together and I'm going to make it fully automated, that's great. But if it's the most complex thing on earth, and it's going to cost an absolute fortune, you'll never do it. And I came from a company that did that. Brought everything together, it was very complex, and it cost the earth, and nobody ever bought it. I'm not going to mention who they are. They start with the letter C. But I've always worked for companies that start with the letter C. My kids keep on telling me, stop working for companies that start with the letter C. The last 4 I've done that. I've actually started with the letter C. So, It does come confusing because I do get them wrong sometimes when I'm on the phone. It's like you're on the phone and you see the wrong one. That's especially when you start a new company. The last one was CASA, in case you weren't aware, the company I work for. So the different schools of thoughts about how do we move these architectures about? How can we move from where we are today to where we would like to go, this vision that we have in the future? There's a couple of schools of thought. The one that I've seen over the last probably 5 or 6 years, and when I was at my last company as well, this was one of the drivers that they had, was to make the access network as simple as we can possibly make it. And they did that by basically virtualizing your entire aggregation network. So basically you take all the intelligence out, the control plane, all of the subscriber management, a lot of the routing capabilities, and you actually pull that back into a centralized location and put it onto big x86 servers. Now that was, we talked about virtual CMTSs, virtual OLTs, virtual routing, virtual BNG. That was the kind of architecture school of thought. Now what we're seeing is that in reality, that really hasn't taken off. I mean, it's taken a long time, a lot of development for people to get to that point. And some of these things are now available, but we're seeing issues now with it because it takes time and things change quickly and everything has to be so dynamic that trying to get things that scale correctly, trying to get things that will, obviously if everything has to go back to the data center, then how do you do these architectures if you're going to do something like, for instance, for wholesale? So we have one customer in the UK, for instance, who are a wholesaler. They have local wholesalers who only look at a local region, and they have national players who look after the whole of the UK. How do they manage that if everything has to go back to a single data center? You have to have distributed data centers, a very complex type of design and type of network. So it makes it kind of hard to adapt. And it's perfectly valid architecture. It will definitely work. It just makes it a bit more, I think, to be honest, it makes it a bit more expensive. If you look at in the cable industry, we had remote PHY. Everyone wanted to do remote PHY. This was remote PHY. The access architecture, simple as possible. Everything gets pulled back to the core. You have virtual CMTSs, and everything was remote PHY. In the fiber industry, same thing, virtual OLT, everything goes pulled back. Your OLT is just basically a media converter, effectively. But what we're seeing is nowadays that isn't really what people are looking at. And one of the reasons is that when we look at how this architecture has to be built, we have some competition. So you have the competition basically from some providers. So you have, for instance, your over-the-top providers, Amazon, Google, as an example, who really don't care what the network is. They have no interest in your network at all. So if it's a service provider, they don't care about you. They just want the subscriber. So for them, their architecture basically is, I want to have my service directly to the subscriber content itself. We don't care about anything else until you get to the subscriber, because that's what their market and that's what their business model is, which again is a perfectly valid business model. But again, that really doesn't help with what you want to do as a provider. You then have the other side of the house. We have maybe some of your bigger legacy routing companies who don't really want to get into this subscriber stuff. They really, that's scary subscriber stuff, low margin. It's quite complex, lots of boxes. We want to stay where we are. Now, they may say, yeah, we will start to put some of the features into this and actually build some features into that for BNGs and that kind of thing. But we don't really want to play in that market. So there's multiple different players in this industry basically trying to work out and stop you basically from doing your consolidation. So you say, as a provider, service provider, I want to do this consolidation, so I'll have the seamless automation, and then you've got other people saying, well, actually, I don't do that. This isn't what we think you should do. We should do something else. So you have to have your own strategy, and when your own strategy, you look at the main things. Obviously, you have convergence, you have your network functions, so actually start to consolidate those functions as well, to bring all the functions together. So not the physical bits of kit, but the features and functionality run over the top of it as well has to be consolidated. And you have to keep it simple. So whatever you want to deploy, you have to deploy it and make it as simple. So these workflows that you would build, you build a workflow to say, I want to onboard a service, I want to upgrade a service, I want to deploy a firewall feature. Anything you want, it's a click of a button. As far as you're concerned, you have a mobile phone, you go, I want this new feature. Boom. And that's, as far as you're concerned, you've got it. And you obviously probably have to pay for it, but you've got it. And now, as far as everybody else is concerned, the back-end systems, that all has to go through multiple levels of different provisioning steps. And that is where we're trying to do this full automation in there. And if you bring the automation in, and it will actually help simplify your network. Now, what we're seeing is the way you do that, basically, is that you actually have to go for a kind of halfway house. And again, in the cable industry, this is a bit like MACPHY. So basically, you're taking some of the intelligence, goes out to the node. Some of it is centralized. So you're doing a bit of both. In the fiber industry, we're doing exactly the same thing. We're basically saying that on the OLTs have more intelligence, so they may do things like subscriber management, or they may do MPLS, or some routing functions. So some of the functionality goes out to the access side of the house, and some of it will go back into a centralized location. So you have a bit of both going on in this architecture. So we'll see, and this is, it says there, from Web 3.0, or edge compute, and more from my point of view, it's more of an edge compute type design, where you actually have a different functions distributed through your network. Now, those functions could be on servers, but they can also be on physical pieces of hardware, like a MACPHY node or a OLT, if you look in the fiber industry on that side. I keep on comparing fiber and cable because, to be honest, they're exactly the same. Coming from both, how they work, it's different technology, obviously, but how they work and how you manage them, there's not really much difference between the two, to be honest, on that front. Which I was really grateful for, because obviously as I moved from cable to fiber, if it was really difficult, I'm getting too old for this nowadays to try and learn everything from scratch. It's much easier to go from this step to that step and go, oh. It definitely did help. But when we're seeing that when you can actually do this, this type of architecture we're seeing more and more nowadays, more away from moving from the fully centralized designs to this type of kind of distributed type of architecture. And we're seeing this more and more from our customers. And whether you're the small customers or the bigger ones, we're actually seeing those. So for instance, for us, we have, City Fibre are one of our biggest customers in the UK. They're a big wholesale provider, but they're actually putting intelligence to the edge, as well as keeping it centralized. So they have a lot of intelligence being moved to the edge. We've got other providers who are doing basically most of the intelligence to the edge. So they're doing a very distributed architecture. So there's lots of different thoughts. Again, just like we had in the cable industry, there's lots of architectures, no wrong architectures, just lots of options. And that's what kept me in my job for the last 30 odd years. And Mike's laughing at the back because it's him as well. But it is, that is how we are. And when we look at this, there's different parts we can look at. I mean, you can have what you have to look at for the access side of the house. So in access to the in-home side, the subscribers are really looking for their connection. They're looking at the type of traffic that they have, and they want security as well. Security is paramount. I mean, nowadays we don't see anybody offering anything without subscriber security as default. People expect whatever they get at home to be secure. If it's not secure, they're not going to buy it. You don't buy something if it's not secure. So we're seeing that by most packages that people buy today, now if you go anywhere really, if you do, I'm trying to think of the comparison website, but you do a comparison website and do a switch, everything, if you look at what's available, security will always be there all the time on that front. And then aggregation side, aggregation, you basically have some security in there as well, but this is basically bringing the traffic together in an efficient manner and then sending it out. And then you've got the handoff to the core where you do the subscriber management. So you have all the subscriber side of the house up there. Network address translation, again, that would probably be done in a centralized location as well. I'll skip the next slide because that's really boring. I hope nobody from our company sees this because that's the product slide. I meant to hide it, but what we're seeing is when you bring this consolidation together, the other big thing that customers today are really pushing is power and savings. How much is this going to save me to do this? And what we've seen is some real figures from customers is that if you start to consolidate some of these functions and deploy newer hardware, so get rid of some of the older legacy routers that are relatively power hungry and moving into some of the more efficient products nowadays, you're seeing anything up to about 70% savings in power. So quite an efficient models that you have nowadays. There's also less rack space. Things are denser nowadays. You have double density cards. You have more dense capabilities on these routers and switches, higher density ports, 40 gig, 100 gig, 200 gig interfaces that are available nowadays. And having all this automation, as you start to bring automation in, it really does save on the OPEX side of things. And we have seen savings in excess of 50% on the OPEX. Customers running live networks with a couple of engineers. I mean, you look at some of our big customers in the UK, a lot of subscribers. They only have about 4 or 5 engineers running the whole thing. It's fully automated on that side. So automation will bring in savings. And some of those savings, obviously, when we look at power, that's one of the big things. When we looked at an example, this is a customer in the US called Centec. They actually did this architectural change, and they said it saved them 73% on power from their network. So it's a big saving. Now, we put it as percentage because obviously America's power's cheaper than it is here, but it made a massive change for them. But they actually said it's not about saving power and killing space. But you have to promote that. You promote that as a company, and that's what they've done is they've promoted that, and it's helped them get revenue from customers, but it's also brought in investment as well. If you can prove that you're actually one of these guys who's looking after the planet, you can actually drive investment on that side. And then when we look at the other things as well, when we look at this automation side of the house, there's lots of things that we need to look at. And I know that maybe some of the things that are happening in the FTTX world are slightly different to the cable industry, but in reality, it's where everybody really needs to go. It's to bring in automation, you have to be efficient. And using legacy technologies to monitor your network and to manage your network really doesn't scale. So you need to look at using things like netconf for provisioning and to look at using telemetry. So moving away from legacy SNMP type polling and to move more like a push type telemetry where it be IPFix or the Google GNMI, Google streaming, one of the 2 most popular versions, but to actually have that streaming telemetry, and then when that data then comes back into your network, to then have the insights to move and model your network and start looking at your network to move away from your standard reactive model, where you basically wait for somebody to phone up and say it's broken, or to a predictive model where we're now seeing customers in the fiber industry, for instance, to look at the lasers that they actually have, the PON lasers, and say, well, this PON laser I can monitor it, and I see that over time, the light levels are starting to drop. So in 3 months' time, that laser is going to go. So we need to think about switching it out, and then you can actually proactively change that. We've also got customers looking at this when we look at the end-to-end side. If you look at the managed Wi-Fi in the home, is to basically say, we're having a problem with your network. They have mobile apps that manage the in-home Wi-Fi that most customers have, and you actually push a notification to them or phone them up, and you basically say, we understand you're having a problem. This is what the problem is. It'll be fixed at this date. Now, I mean, that's much better than your kids screaming in your ear to basically say the internet's broken, fix it. As an example, the other day, I was out at football with my son. I got a phone call from my wife to say the internet's not working. We can't watch TV. We then had a phone call from my son, 5 minutes later, my other son, to say the internet's broken. I can't get on my computer, even though they're in the same building. They didn't talk to each other. And he had multiple phone calls. I said, what am I supposed to do? But the thing is, there wasn't any patience. There wasn't no waiting to see. Now, if they had actually got a notification to say there's an internet, there's a problem, it'll be fixed in 10 minutes, it would have been fine, and you would have been fine. Instead of that, there's me trying to work out how to get access to the customer support numbers for the ISP, which isn't the easiest thing in the world, to try and access it, and it was a nightmare. So it's much better to be proactive if you can on that side of things. And then when we look at the domains, you've got your automation domain. It can be maybe just part of the network. It can be the whole network. So we're seeing customers initially start with something small, so maybe just the access side of the house, before they start to branch out. If you start to branch out into the core networks, you then have to bring in automation for your core routers, where that may be a multi-vendor scenario, where you may have like Cisco or Juniper or Sienna or one of the big players, who obviously are wanting you to tie you into their provisioning systems, so it makes it a bit more difficult. But you start small, and you can start to build up. But the idea is to basically take your existing network today, where that network may be covering only part of the overall scenario. In this example here, this is actually dedicated specifically for fiber, because today with GPON, if you run GPON or XGS-PON, as customers are doing today, your maximum speed is 10 gigabits per second on XGS-PON, 2.5 for GPON. So you can't run really a 5 gig network. Yeah, you can a push, but you can do some backhauling, mid-haul in there. But if you want to do your enterprise networks or a medium-sized business, it can't really be done on properly on that. Small business, yeah, no problem. That can work on a 10 gig network, easy. But if you want to do like a bank or some bigger side of the house, that really isn't there yet. However, in a couple of years' time, now we say a couple of years, probably 4 to 5 years' time, to be honest, I would say. I mean, you will see the first 50 gig PON, XGS PON, starting to arrive to the market, well, to its trials and demos, probably end of this year, start of next year. We think we'll probably see the first ones start to appear. But as a commercial product, I honestly think it will be a good few years yet. And you need a driver. I mean, the technology may be there. It has to stabilize. Have to build products for it. But there's a driver. And one of the drivers is, what do you need 50 gigabits per second for, to be honest? And enterprise is one of them. Businesses, mobile backhaul, 5G, being able to put 5G networks and collapse everything onto those and then consolidate everything will be how you actually bring that all together. And that will be the driver going forward for 50 gig PON. Just like you had with DOCSIS 3.0, 3.1, it took time before you actually had the demand, before you would actually deploy it. Why would you spend all the money on something new if you don't really need it, to be honest, on that side? And the Wi-Fi side of the house is exactly the same. Wi-Fi 7 will be available, or start to become available now. Nobody really uses it, and nobody will use it for another, say, year or so before we really get the products out to market. And then when we bring it all together, you have to then say, well, what are you going to do with all of this? How do you manage this all together? Again, some Calix stuff on there, don't worry about that. It's more about you basically saying you take your access network, whatever the access network may be, whether it be a fiber network or a cable network or whatever you have, and then you basically then take some of that information from that network and you pass it back to another application. So it may be a cloud application, it may be something else. And then you have different personas that will use that information. So there can be a lot of data that comes back from these networks today. And you can say, right, well, my operations team will look at the access network, for instance, and they will look at part of that data. You have your support teams, so your first line, second line support, they will be looking at a different set of that bit of data. Your marketing teams may actually have a view as well. So they may actually look at, as Guy mentioned, about having, looking at personas of how that subscriber in your home is using your data. So they may say, well, over the day, I will have these group of subscribers are gamers, and they look at the internet and they look at Facebook at 6 o'clock at night. So you can say, right, I'm going to launch a gaming package. I know who my gamers are, and I'll target them at 6 o'clock at night with the advert, because that's when they look at the internet and look at those social media things. So that's all about managing the persona of the person, and that's where you look at the demographics. Would be really useful. In the US, those demographics are available. We can actually find out like the type of people, the income, the size of the house. All of that is there. Even like the size of the house, how many rooms they have for meshing, although the houses are made of chipboard, so it's nice and easy to get the Wi-Fi signals through. But that is all available there. Now in the UK, obviously GDPR sort of like makes that a bit more of a challenge on that side of the house, as does brick walls on there. So basically, just to finish up, and actually I've done too bad with time, I'm kind of getting you back on track for lunch. The idea basically is, again, don't worry about the bottom part. The idea is, what we try and say is, it is possible to do it now, but really we need to look at convergence again. We've talked about convergence for years. We really need to start getting down there. There are real drivers now to look at convergence. And then we can start to consolidate those network functions on top of it. So all of your firewalls, all of your subscriber management, all of that can be managed on top of that as well. And it has to be adaptive. And this is where the automation comes in. You can actually make that network adaptive and make it be configurable as to your demands, as when you want it. And that capability is around today. It is available in multiple different platforms on multiple different companies that allows you to do that. And then as we move forward, it's something we've talked about for many, many years, is that we move away from speeds and feeds, finally. And we actually move to basically your network as a service. You're deploying everything as a service. You will deploy, you don't care about what the speed is anymore. If you've got 50 gig PON, you don't care what the speed, nobody's going to care about speeds anymore. It's just going to be about what is the quality of the service that comes over it. So it's deploying these services on your network. So it's network as a service. I think that will finally come. I remember mentioning that many, many years ago when I was at Cisco. Probably to John, bored him to tears at that point of view. So with that, I kind of went through it just to get you back on track. Hopefully that was okay. Any questions at all on there? Yes, John.
Why you move all these cable and fibers? My view of the future is supposed to be wireless, everything connect to wireless, fiber is only for backhaul, no Wi-Fi, you save millions and millions of pounds of electricity, no Wi-Fi box. Also, no live television, everything will be streaming. Again, you don't have box anymore. But I noticed that the cable companies don't want to do that because they're going to lose the money. But really, the money the government spend today, if they do millimeter wave transmitters in a neighborhood, will save so much electricity, will be very fast. You don't have to change from your mobile, go to your house. Your television will be streaming everything you want instantly. You don't need a box. Your fridge will be connected to 5G or 7G, whatever it is, but all wireless. Why are we still spending billions doing fiber to the home or the speed? It's pointless. And actually, wireless is latency better than any Wi-Fi. So everything is better. Why are we spending money putting so much fiber on the streets? It's just ridiculous. I can't see
Well,
why.
I mean, the point-to-point, or point-to-multipoint external Wi-Fi stuff is great until it rains. And then the performance gets hit with weather, it gets hit by external factors. And these base stations that you have are, to be honest, I think that nowadays, I mean, a PON network is passive. It's not powered like the cable industry, cable networks are.
Yeah.
So it's completely passive on that side of the house. So there's nothing in there.
Still, you need a box, a Wi-Fi box, 2 boxes. Can you imagine 40 million of these boxes in the house, 24 hours a day, even though they are 15 watts, they are a lot of power. If we want the green out, why not having a transmitter in the neighborhood and all the houses in the neighborhood get that transmitter?
I mean, that would be wonderful, but you have to keep in mind as well that there's a lot of televisions, probably most of them,
So
that
what?
don't have 5G. So you have to, everybody has to buy a new television, or they can take a service.
Started in Switzerland. They got 5G. They don't have because of the mountains.
Yeah.
They got 5G everywhere. No Wi-Fi at all. Have you been there?
Switzerland, a few times.
In Switzerland.
Yeah, a couple of times.
There's no problem.
It's a bit hilly.
Yeah, no, but the thing is, there's no problem about using 5G.
I mean,
Wireless.
5G is, I mean, everybody talks about 5G, and I don't deny the fact that 5G, in theory, has wonderful data rates. But, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if you ever your phone ever hits 5G, it just comes to a grinding halt today. It's like going to the dark ages when you put 5G on. And that's just because of the way it's being used, and the bandwidths and the spectrum that's available in the UK right
Exactly.
now. And that all has to be freed up. And that's, I mean, it will take time. And, yeah, in time, maybe not before I retire, I hope, then it may well become a thing. But
I know, but if all the money is spending putting fibers, so many fibers. I mean, in my home, I got 3 different fibers. Why we need so much fiber in one neighborhood? It's pointless.
can I have one? I don't have any. I live in the middle of nowhere.
It's just ridiculous.
Please.
Anyway.
I live in the dark ages. No, but I mean, that's one of the problems is there is overbuild, and that is a big issue that there is in today. It never happened in the cable industry because it was franchised. But in the fibre industry, it's not franchised, and you can overbuild. So you have BT, OpenReach will definitely be there. You probably have City Fibre, and you probably have a local guy as well.
You know why? Because it's too much money from the government, which is my money.
They're paying us, so yeah. No.
Have a drink on you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Be kind, Dave.
Always kind, always kind. So the pitch on automation, and you'll have an easy to manage, easy to operate network, and you can do it with 2, 5 people or whatever, is great for a new service provider. But how do you manage the situation where you go to an existing service provider who may have a GPON network which is staffed by countless operations people who are used to SNMP? How do you manage that pitch of transformation to them when they may, to Sarah's point earlier this morning, be worried about their own jobs and their own existence? How do you manage that positioning?
Yeah, well, I mean that personal looking at the end users and the people worrying about their jobs is always something that you have to think about. Because if you rock up and say, "Here's a product, it's great. It will do everything you want with 2 people. So pick your 2 best." Or 2 cheapest, and the rest of you on your bike. It's something we have to keep in mind. I mean, we have to basically say that doing the automation side of things, it can't be done overnight. And it usually will happen over time, where you'll migrate, as you start to migrate, especially if you're on a GPON network, for instance, you'll start to migrate to XGS, or you'll do a technology transition, and that will be at the point where you can then say, I'll start to slowly, I'm late, so lunch. So that would be the point where you basically start to then say, right, well, I'll now start to look at bringing in a part of this automation side of things. Some of the streaming, the telemetry side of things, moving away from SNMP, that's not going to affect anybody in reality. That would just make the life easier. They just do things faster than you would actually have with SNMP. But bringing in the provisioning side of the house and actually managing and provisioning subscriber services, then yeah, there may be an effect, but it will be a gradual one over time. So as people retire, then basically you can actually do that. I'm only kidding, John. Yeah. So, but that is something you have to keep in mind. Yeah, you can't hit somebody. You can't rock up to a customer and say, "I've got a great service. Here we go. Deploy this," and everybody. You don't need anybody. Now your CFO and some of the seniors may like that, but in reality, it's a game you have to play, and it's one we've been playing for many years.
Any more? Last call? No? Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, everyone.